today is a Morera's theorem, but Morera's theorem is also another powerful theorem which tells you about about a condition which implies that a given function is an analytic function. And the statement about Morera's theorem is this is a Morera theorem. Suppose that f is a continuous function. F is a continuous function on a domain. You just need a domain. There is nothing that is simply connected होना चाहिए जो it needs to be a domain. Continuous on a domain D such that integral over boundary of R fz dz is equal to 0 for each rectangle R, but we have to consider not all rectangle, but let rectangle R with sides parallel to the coordinate axis. So this should be the rectangles contained in domain D. So this way, if you have a continuous function on a domain D, what the hypothesis of this theorem is telling you that if you have a continuous function, f is a continuous function, and the extra thing is that if you consider any rectangle, but you have to consider rectangle whose sides are parallel to the coordinate axis. That means its sides must be parallel to x-axis and the real axis and the imaginary axis. We don't require these triangles. We don't require such triangles. Then it says that if you have this such situation such that over the boundary of such rectangles, the integral of this function needs to be 0. This much of hypothesis implies then that this function f is analytic. देखिए जी कितना powerful result ये आप देख सकते हैं, because we are showing that f is an analytic, not only differentiable. ये कंटिन्यूटी के साथ एक एक्स्ट्रा कंडीशन हमने यूज करी और ज्यादा आई डोंट थिंक दिस इज अ हैवी कंडीशन कि आपके पास फंक्शन का इंटीग्रल 0 होना चाहिए, लाइन इंटीग्रल ओवर द बाउंड्री ऑफ एनी रेक्टेंगल whose sides are parallel to the coordinate axis, then such a function is always an analytic function. For analytic function, such an integral is always 0 because of Cauchy's theorem. So you can also think of this theorem as a kind of converse of Cauchy's theorem, that whenever there is a continuous functions where the in line integral of that function over any rectangle is 0, then you are going to always have that function to be analytic. So let us write its proof. We have to show that this function is analytic on a domain D, and to prove that this function is analytic on a domain D, what is sufficient? You just have to show that this is differentiable at each point of this domain D. So let us fix a point in this domain. Let me fix a domain point in domain D, at Z0 in D, and since D is a domain, so it is a domain. If it is a domain, then it is open. Z0 is its interior point, so I can consider a certain disk which a certain disk with center Z0, and that disk is still contained inside this domain D because this is an interior point. Here it is. I have to show that this function is analytic at Z0. And to show that this function is analytic at Z0, what do you do? You have to show that this is differentiable in a certain neighborhood of Z0. And this is what I'm going to show, that this function is differentiable at the neighborhood of this. But let us define now. Define, let's, yeah, just then there is a disk, I mean the open disk with center at Z0 and of certain radius R, which is contained inside domain D. Now, for any Z in this disk T, let me define a function for any function Z here. Define a function capital F of Z as integral over Z0 to Z. I will tell you what is this path of integration, F of theta d theta. So what we are going to do, suppose this Z is somewhere here. Let me write now in a separate way, in a bigger. I have Z0 here, and suppose Z is lying somewhere here. Z lies somewhere here. So what is the path of integration? This is your plane. The path of integration we are choosing to be a particular one. And what path of integration I'm choosing? I'm choosing first the horizontal line and then vertical line. I'm choosing this way. This is the path of integration that I am considering. Let me mention here where the path of integration from Z0 to Z is through a horizontal line followed by a vertical line. Followed by a vertical line. This is the path of integration. And remember, I'm considering disk. Within disk, this path is always possible because disk do not have any holes. Disk is a simply connected domain. So there I can do this thing. Otherwise, if you do not have the simple connectedness, then maybe at certain point this line might have fallen into some hole. But within disk, you don't have hole. Maybe the domain has holes, but we are least concerned about that because I need to check the analyticity at a point, and around each point I can draw a disk, which is a simple connector. And the next thing that needs to be observed is that why we are considering this path. Why we cannot, what if we consider some other path? What if I consider this path? First vertical line and then horizontal line. What it will imply? Then it will imply, if you consider both the paths, what I want to show, to tell you now, that the value of this capital F is going to be same whether you choose the first path that I mentioned or whether you choose the green path. Why it is so? Because look at this. Let me write this first path to be C and let this be C1. Because then C union, if you change the orientation of C, if you change the orientation of this, not C, if you change the orientation of this green path, your change its orientation, then what? Then this C union, if you change the orientation of C1, it will be C1. Then this is a rectangle. It is a rectangle, and let me write it. And what you know, it is a boundary of certain rectangle. Then by hypothesis, what is the hypothesis that we have? By hypothesis, the integral of f over this rectangle is 0. But integral of over this is 0 implies you can break down this integral as integral over c fz dz plus integral over minus of c1 fz dz is equal to 0. This further implies integral over c fz dz, since the orientation of c1 is negative, so it will be sign negative, and c1 fz dz is equal to 0. Hence you have the equality here. Hence you have the equality of the two integrals. So the following the path first horizontal and then vertical makes no difference if you follow the path first vertical and then horizontal. So this is because this is the part of the hypothesis. So that means your function, this capital F, is a well-defined function. So you don't need to worry कि if हम different path follow करेंगे तो we might have some other value, तो फिर आपके पास function differentiable नहीं होगा, well defined नहीं होगा. Now what I'm going to show next, I'm going to show that this capital F function is differentiable and its derivative is small f. Then choose h not equal to 0 such that z plus h is in the disk for fix, let us fix z for the time being in disk dz not r. Then you have again now this situation, you have z naught, then you have somewhere z here, and you might have z plus h somewhere here. Then you will have this path. This is the path of integration from z to z plus h, and the path of integration from z to z plus is, this is the path of integration from z to z. But again I can choose another path from z to z plus h, and the path that I'm going to choose now is this one, from here to here, this one. And then again, since you have this rectangle formation in this path, that means over this one and closed part, the contribution of the integral from this point here, let this be point alpha to point beta via this first following the horizontal path and then vertical path, is same as the if you follow the path first vertical and then horizontal path. So that means I can write this to be f of z plus h, which has to be, by definition, it has to be integral from z naught to z plus h f of zeta d zeta. But note that I can write it in this way. I can take the path first from z naught to z and f of zeta d zeta, and then I can take the path from z to z plus h. It is f of zeta d zeta. So, but on the right hand side, The first integral is nothing but is the value of capital F at z plus integral z to z plus h. It is f of zeta d zeta. This implies what you have now. You have this f z plus h minus f of z is equal to integral from z to z plus h f of zeta dz. So let's further simplify this. This further implies f of z plus h minus f of z is equal to, on the right hand side I'm going to add something and I'm going to subtract also something. And what is that? I'm going to write this thing as z to z plus h, z plus h, and it is f of zeta, and in f of zeta let us add f of z and let us subtract also f of z. And now use the linear property of the integrals. Because of linearity, you can separate these integrals z to z plus h. It will be f of zeta minus f of z d zeta plus integral z to z plus h f of z d zeta. And note that in the second integral, f of z is a constant because you are fixing z, you are not changing z. Z is a fixed quantity for the time being. So you can take out the z, and let me write the first integral first. You can write f of z, and then you will have the integral z to z plus h d of zeta. That has to be, by fundamental theorem of line integral, to be endpoint minus initial point, and that is h plus now I have this z to z plus h. I need to use the continuity. That's why I'm just creating this difference f of zeta minus f of z. I have to use the continuity because continuity is a part of hypothesis. So let us divide throughout by h and take the modulus. If I divide it throughout by h and shift f of z to the left hand side and take the modulus, I get this expression h minus f of z and modulus, and on the right hand side I will have modulus of 1 upon h integral z to z plus h f of zeta minus f of z d zeta. This is, and again use the property of the linear line integrals. When you have modulus inside the integral, then you will have this less than or equal to 1 upon mod h integral z to z plus h, and this is mod of f zeta minus f of z mod of d zeta. Let it be equation star. And now our proof will be complete. Not proof will be complete, but we will be able to establish that this capital F is differentiable at z and its derivative is small f once the right hand side of this equation star is established to go to 0 when mod h goes to 0. So let us do this thing now. So you have situation, you have a disk and you have z naught. Okay, you have a path from z naught to z plus h, but at the same time you have a path from z to z plus h. First, let me measure what can be the maximum length of this path. Then let me write it in a separate. You have this situation. Suppose you have z here, and z is x plus iy, and you have, and suppose you have, let me write, let h be It is a complex number. So when you add, you have x here, and so when you add h, z plus h, this is z plus h. What will be z plus h? Z plus h will be x plus h1 plus I times it will be y plus h2. So you will have x plus h1 here, and obviously this will be the part iy, and here you will have y plus h2i. This is something. So the length of this contour now from z to z plus h is the length of this line, these two line segments. So what is the length of this first line segment? The length of this first line segment is mod of h1. I'm writing mod of h1 because h1 can be negative as well. And the length of this second line segment, is mod of h2. So in nutshell, the length of this contour from z to z plus h is h1 plus mod h2, and I can write it to be less than equal because mod of h1 has to be less than mod of h, and also mod of h2 has to be less than mod of h. It is equal to twice mod of h. So we can say that the length of this contour from z to z plus h is at most 2h. So I can write the length of the contour. Contour, I mean the path first horizontal that we are following here. Otherwise, it is because it is also a contour. The length of contour from z to z plus h is at most 2 times mod of h. You have this length at most. Now, what you have this disk here, and now f is continuous by hypothesis, and if f is continuous by hypothesis for any epsilon bigger than 0, we can choose delta bigger than 0 such that you will have this mod of f of zeta minus f of z. We are talking about continuity at z is less than epsilon upon something, but here I will take epsilon upon 2. Even if you don't take 2, hardly matters. Just so that I have at last only epsilon, but it's okay. It's epsilon by 2 whenever you have zeta minus z to be less than delta. So what we can do, this is the disk. What we can do, we can choose h to be small enough. You have a disk now. I have to choose h to be small enough so that this disk of radius delta at z contains z plus h also. So we chose h such that mod of h is small enough so that the path, let me write the path of integration, or the contour, the path of integration. I do not need, so that it is better to write so that z plus h is inside this disk at del z at delta, so that you have this sufficient. Because we have the liberty to choose h, and indeed we have to make h goes to 0. So you have this setting now that h is, but that means you have mod of h to be less than delta. You have mod of h to be less than delta. See then what happens. Now, with this setting, let us go back to this place. Let's check out this estimate now. Thus, with this setting, I will have mod of h integral over z to z plus h f of zeta minus f of z mod of d zeta. It will be less than 1 upon mod h because you are taking zeta minus h to be less than delta, and by continuity this f zeta minus z has to be less than epsilon half times z to z plus h mod of d zeta. Now the integral that is left with us is nothing but this is the length of the contour from z to z plus h, and as I already have computed that its length is at most twice of mod of h, so it has to be less than or equal to 1 upon mod h epsilon half into twice of mod of h. So I knew that I will get this 2 here. That's why I chose epsilon by half, so that 2 and 2 cancel and mod h cancel. I am left with epsilon. So what we have, hence we have this thing fz plus h minus fz upon h minus f of z is less than epsilon whenever, what was the condition on h? The condition on h you can see here. The condition on h was that h should be chosen in such a way that z plus h is in this case. But when you say that z plus h is this, that means mod of h is less than delta. So that means whenever mod of h is less than delta. Hence, for every epsilon bigger than 0, you will have this estimate, and your corresponding to every epsilon, you will get such a delta. And this implies nothing but by the definition of limit, it implies that limit h goes to 0, f of z plus h minus f of z upon h is equal to f of z. So this f of z is a well-defined quantity on the right-hand side, and this implies that this limit exists. And what is the value of this limit? This value of the limit is f of z, but this limit is said now to be derivative of function z. And now this z was an arbitrary point in the disk centered at z naught. So in particular, derivative of f at z naught exists and is equal to f of z. So what it means, this capital F is differentiable at each point of the domain D. This shows that this implies that f is differentiable at each point of the domain D. But when you say that it is differentiable at each point of the domain D, this implies that implies that this capital F is analytic on domain D. And extra information that we are getting is that its derivative is F. Now here comes the Cauchy integral formula that we did in the previous lecture, that derivative of, by using Cauchy integral formula, we proved that derivative of an analytic function is always an analytic. And now we proved here that this capital F is an analytic function and its derivative is small f. Hence, small f is also an analytic function. Hence, by Cauchy integral formula, f is also analytic on D. This is also analytic on D. So this is Morera's theorem, and you again noticed here that here you had to use this Cauchy integral formula as consequence as well. So this is second thing that you observed by using Cauchy integral formula. So if you have any question regarding Morera's theorem, please tell me. Because after that, if any one of you are listening, please tell me. Another important consequence, I will have so many, but the next consequence that I'm going to tell you about is known as a theorem by Levelay's theorem. This is a very amazing result in complex function theory, and its proof depends upon the Cauchy integral formula. So what it says that it states that let f be an entire function. What is an entire function? Entire function is a function which is differentiable on entire complex plane. Be an entire function. Now it says that if f is bounded, then f is constant. See, you have important information about entire functions now in the form of Levelay's theorem. What is this? And this information is that bounded entire functions are always constant. That means if you have a function which is non-constant, if you have an entire function which is non-constant, that is just that makes it sufficient to tell you to conclude that this function is always unbounded. For example, you consider this function. If you look at this function fz to be sine z, you know this is non-constant. Is non-constant. You know it is non-constant. How to establish that it is non-constant? You just take two values. It must take two different values, and it is non-constant. It is also entire. It is non-constant and entire function. If it is non-constant entire function, then by this Levelay's theorem. So Levelay's theorem, f is unbounded. F cannot be bounded, because if f is bounded, then Levelay's theorem says that it must be constant, but this is a non-constant function. And in the same way, you have so many entire functions. For example, exponential function, you have cos of z, you have polynomial of degree greater than or equal to 1, and you have all the combinations of these functions which are entire functions, and they are non-constant functions. So this is you can identify whether a function, entire function, is constant or non-constant, and at the same time, on the basis of being constant on this, you can identify whether it's bounded or unbounded functions. And its proof is a very short; it is not a lengthy proof. What hypothesis do we have? We have that f is a bounded function. I have to show that it is a constant function. And what I'm going to use to show that f is a constant function, I'm going to prove that its derivative is 0 on C, on the entire complex plane, because if the derivative of a function is 0 on a domain, then that function is a constant on that domain, and C is a domain. So let us fix a point z naught in C. I have to show that the derivative of this function is constant. Then, since it is an entire function, you draw any sort of disk, large or small, the function is going to remain analytic on that disk. Let r be greater than 0, then f is analytic on this disk also. Indeed, whole of the closure disk, because f is entire function, it is analytic everywhere. So in particular on this disk also, this is contained in C. And now I can use the Cauchy integral formula for derivatives. I have to use the Cauchy integral formula for derivatives by Cauchy integral formula for derivative. For first derivative, what it says that the value of any point in the disk but in particular I'm concerned with the value at z naught. Value at z naught is given by uh, it has to be 1 upon 2 pi I integral over the boundary of this disk. What is the boundary of this disk? This is boundary of this disk is a circle. Z minus z naught is equal to r, and it is f zeta upon let me write it z only. This is z minus z naught t zeta, but here z minus z naught power has to be square now because it's the first derivative, because power is n plus 1. If the order is n, derivatives order is n, the power is n. So here the derivatives order is 1, so power has to be 2. Now at the same time, it is given to you that this function is bounded, and let m be the bound of this function such that mod of fz is less than or equal to m for all z in C. This is the part of hypothesis. I'm not taking it by myself, that this function is bounded, and I'm just taking that let m be its bound because it will have a bound. Thus, therefore, let us calculate the modulus of this derivative of f at z naught. It has to be less than or equal to 1 upon 2 pi integral mod of z upon mod of z minus z naught square into mod of dz. This is also dz here. The variable I'm keeping z naught zeta here, dz. So it has to be less than, because the mod of fz is less than or equal to m upon 2 pi, and our circle, we are considering this integral over circle of radius r, and on the circle of radius r, the mod of z minus z naught is equal to r. So the numerator part of z minus z naught mod square has to be r square in times the circle mod z minus z naught equals to r times. So the integral left to you is now is nothing but it is the length of the circle. It has to be 2 pi r. That means you have that derivative of function f at z naught is less than or equal to m times 2 pi r square into the length of the circle of radius r is 2 pi r. Now we are left with m upon r. So what I have f prime z naught is less than or equal to m upon r. Now note that what was r? You had z naught, and you chose r to be an arbitrary radius of this disk. But I can make this disk as large as possible because we have an entire function, and whatever disk you take, the function is always going to be analytic on that disk, because the disk will remain inside the complex plane, and it's going to be analytic always there. That I can change the size of this radius r according to convenience. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make this r to be large enough. If I make it to be large enough, m is a constant thing, it will go to 0. M upon r will go to 0. That means as r goes to infinity, as r becomes arbitrarily large, that means the derivative of this function, the modulus of the derivative of this function at z naught is 0. This implies that modulus is 0 when the value complex number is 0. But you chose z naught to be an arbitrary point. Z naught was an arbitrary point, hence derivative of f is 0. The whole derivative is 0, but when derivative is 0, that means the function f is constant function. And this is a very simple proof of Leibniz theorem, that a constant entire function is always a bounded, and a bounded entire function. Bounded entire function is always a constant function. And it is a very interesting theorem, interesting result also. You do not have such kind of condition in case of real analysis. If you consider the analytic functions to be those functions which are infinitely differentiable functions, in case of real analysis, you will have, if you look at sine x also, in case of real, your sine function is bounded there, even though by the definition of analytic function, sine is a analytic there, but it is bounded and it is non-constant. So this Leibniz theorem's counterpart do not exist in real analysis. So you have any questions?